Good morning, everyone. Do you like watching sports? Today, I want to start by talking about a sports league in England. In England, there is a European football league called the Premier League. And London is one of the dream destinations for both the fans and the players. There are 6 teams that play in the English Premier League located in London. And out of those teams, Arsenal and Tottenham are both located in North London. And as a result, they are local rivals. And if you go to North London, people who wear red are people who follow Arsenal Football Club, and people who wear white and blue are people who follow Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. Tottenham followers hate Arsenal so much that even Tottenham-themed Christmas merch and decorations are all green and blue and does not include red. And there's actually a Korean player that you might be familiar with in Tottenham called Heung-min Son. And Son actually bought a Ferrari model that only comes in red. But when he bought it, he decided to take it to a shop on his own and color it black, because it wouldn't have been acceptable for followers to see one of their players riding in something that was red. Or at least while he was in North London, because obviously when he plays for Korea, Korea's colors are red. So now if you end up in North London in the future, you will now be able to tell which team people follow just by the color that they are wearing. And in England, since European football is so popular, they even have a saying. You can change a wife, but you can't change your team. You can't change your football team. And although I do not agree with this statement in any way or form, and I think it's very derogatory, but it goes to show how dedicated they are to the team that they are following. I wonder how dedicated we are to what we follow. I wonder if we are so dedicated to who we follow that the outsiders, people outside of the church, will be able to tell who we follow just by looking at us, just as you can tell which team a person follows by looking at what clothes they are wearing. Today's message is about following. It is about who and what we follow. But before we dive into the main text, let's have a look at some background information. As you know, Jesus had just performed the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, which we talked about last week, and many more signs. And because of the miracles and the signs that he was performing, he had become very popular. And the people wanted to make him king by force. So Jesus withdrew from them and went into the mountains. And the disciples went ahead of Jesus to the other side of the lake. But on the way, they were met with a storm. And that's when Jesus walked on the water and calmed the storm. And this is the sign that we will have a look at next week. And in the morning, the crowd that Jesus was preaching to realized that Jesus was no longer there. So the crowd went by boat to a place where Jesus was, which was Capernaum, even though Jesus had presumably come to the other side to get away from the crowds. And when they found Jesus, the crowd asked him when he had gotten there. And Jesus responded with a confrontation in verse 26. Verse 26 reads, Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." In other words, Jesus is saying, you only follow me because you want full stomachs, because you are materially motivated. So why should we follow Jesus? Jesus tells us the answer in verse 27. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Jesus was teaching that there were two kinds of bread, a material bread that spoils and a spiritual bread that endures eternally. Has anyone looked at their fridge and complained there's nothing to eat? Has anyone's mom or dad had said that there's nothing to eat when checking the fridge? And how many times has that happened on the same day that you went shopping? Well, this is exactly what Jesus was trying to portray here. Even though one might work hard to buy groceries and food with money that they earned with hard work, there's time that it will end up spoiling. And Jesus says, do not work for food that spoils. Jesus is telling the crowd that no matter how much they work, the food that you can get from working, the bread that you will provide on the table by working, will one day be gone. And therefore, in the perspective of eternity, this is not important. Now, I want to make sure that I say that this is not a call to become lazy or complacent. This is about putting priorities in the right places. So, what is this thing we have to put our priorities to? Jesus tells us in middle of verse 27 that there is food that endures eternally. And it says that the Son of Man, this is Jesus when he refers to himself, will give us. The food that spoils, meaning the food that we eat physically, will eventually spoil. However, unlike physical food, this is food that comes from Jesus, and it does not come from our works, but is given to us by Jesus himself. And how come Jesus can grant us this type of food to us? End of verse 27 tells us, for him, meaning Jesus, God the Father has placed his seal of approval. And yet people did not properly understand what Jesus was trying to say. In verse 28, the people asked, what must we do to do the work that God requires? This is again taking the idea of work to gain salvation. Jesus himself said the food he is talking about will be given to them, and yet they are asking what work they needed to do. And Jesus tells them once more in verse 29. The work of God is this, to believe in the one he sent. To make this easy to understand, let's just say that one of your friends came over to your place to stay on Friday night. So your friend comes over, you guys have an amazing dinner, you stay up late playing games and talking. The next day, as your friend is leaving, he hands you a $100 bill and says, here's $30 for the dinner, $40 for the lodging, $10 for letting me play your games, and $5 for giving me your time, and the rest is tip. You will probably say, hey, you don't owe me anything, there's no need for that. But what if your friend responds, I most certainly do, I'm not a freeloader, here, take $100, is $100 not enough? The thing is, in this context, the mention of payment in such a setting will be an insult to the friendship that you have between you and this other person. But what do? We find ourselves trying to pay for something that God has given to us so freely. And just like the friend that came over to your house in this hypothetical situation and tried to pay you, it's an insult to the work that God has done on the cross. The work of God is believing in the one he sent. Jesus is saying, there is no work that needs to be done to be justified. Just follow me. And we go through this over and over again on Friday night Bible studies. Notice that I said that there's no work that needs to be done in order to be justified. But there is work that we have to do in order to be sanctified, in order to become more and more like Jesus every day. But just the matter of the fact is that to be justified in the first place, there's no work that needs to be done. There needs to be faith, and then work comes as a response to the things that we have so freely been given. And so this is what Jesus is trying to say, but this is not a call to complacency or laziness. This is just saying that we need to get an order of salvation in the right order. First, you are justified, and then you become more and more sanctified day by day by following God and in His laws. And then at the end, we become glorified by the works that we have done. So that's the order, and we need to get this order in the right order. Anyhow, the crowd, even after they had just witnessed Jesus feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, asked Jesus in verse 30 to 31. So they asked him, "What sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat." What on earth are these people thinking here? What more do they need to see? Well, if we turn to Exodus chapter 16, the very thing that the crowd is quoting, we will find our answer. In Exodus chapter 16, the Israelites had nothing to eat, so they started to complain to Moses and to God. And God told Moses that He will send bread from heaven. And just imagine this happened to you. You wake up in the morning and you find bread on the floor as if the bread was growing out from the floor. You will probably ask, what is it? And this is exactly what the Israelites did. And because of this incident, they ended up naming this bread manna. Because manna, translated into English, means what is it? And the Jews of Jesus' time believed in a legend that said that during the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, Jeremiah had taken some of the manna and had hidden it. And when the Messiah came, he will find it and then provide the manna to the people. So the crowd was saying to Jesus, "Hey Jesus, you did an amazing miracle feeding the 5,000 people yesterday, but what we really want is one big one, literal bread from heaven that is provided to us every day, so that they will not go hungry." This is why Jesus told them that you're not looking at these signs, you're looking because you want to be full, you want to be filled with food. How outrageously stupid of the crowd. But let's be honest, don't we ask God for very similar things? We forget what God has done in our lives. And we often ask God to give us signs, don't we? Well, if you don't, then I suppose that you have a lot of faith. I sometimes forget what God has already done in my life and proceed to ask God for more and more signs. Job chapter 27 verse 3 tells us that every breath that we breathe is God's breath in our nostrils. The very fact that we are alive and breathing is a miracle, is a sign. And this pandemic has shown us that in a proper way. With the worst cases of the virus, people could not breathe without ventilators. Our ability to breathe even is a gift from God. Anyhow, let's get back to the text. Jesus saw that the crowd needed some correction. So he said in verse 32 and 33, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven. It is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." The crowd seemed to think that it was a person, namely Moses, that gave the Israelites bread and followed Moses. But in fact, in verse 34, we see that their ignorance and stupidity is not necessarily out of bad intentions, just a bad understanding. It says that the crowd responded, "Sir, give us this bread." And then Jesus finally came to a conclusion that they needed the whole thing spelled out for them. Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." No matter what food we eat or what drink we drink, we will soon be hungry and thirsty again. Apart from Jesus, there's nothing that properly satisfies. But on the other hand, Jesus satisfies, and he satisfies completely. Jesus often used metaphors that we can easily understand. So he used hunger and thirst. But this is not a hunger and thirst that we physically feel. No matter what we do, nothing will ever completely satisfy us spiritually. And it will feel like our souls are starving and our souls are dehydrated. Just as the most expensive meal will eventually be digested and you will feel hungry again, the most exciting events, the most pleasurable things will eventually come to an end. But this bread of life, Jesus Christ, will completely satisfy our spirits. Isaiah chapter 55 verses 1 to 3 tells us, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk, without money and without cost. Why spend money on things on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me. Listen, that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promise to David." This was fulfilled prophecy, and Jesus was in fact referring to himself as the fulfilled promise of Isaiah. Now, if we go back to our text and look at verses 36 to 40, the main text tells us, "But as I told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. All those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my will, but to do the will of he who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of all those he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. For my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day." Here's the thing. Those who followed only the signs and only to have their fill, even when they saw the signs, they did not believe. They did not believe Jesus, even though Jesus was right in front of them. The very fact that we are able to believe in Jesus, even though he's not right in front of us, is a gift from God. And Jesus will raise us up on the last day, as it says in verse 37. And this is talking about the glorification that we referred to earlier, talking about the Friday night Bible study. So, here's a good time to assess ourselves and who or what we should follow. In our passages, some people were following the signs that Jesus was performing. It seems that others were following Jesus to get food. We know the answer that we should follow Jesus. We all know that. But let's be honest with ourselves. Do we follow Jesus, or are we following the benefits that come with Jesus just like the crowd? And when we turn past our main text and go to the extended text from verses 60 to 71, we see that many disciples were offended and left Jesus. And specifically in verse 67, Jesus asked the 12 disciples, You do not want to leave too, do you? In the ESV version, it says, Do you want to go away as well? So, we are also left with a choice. We ask ourselves whether we are following Jesus because Jesus is the bread of life, or whether we are following the benefits that come with Jesus as the bread of life. And we need to decide. We, as humans, have a selfish tendency, and even the most faithful person can sometimes fall into the trap of following the benefits of following Jesus. So now that we have heard this, we all need to ask ourselves, am I going to follow Jesus, who is the bread of life, or am I going to keep on following the benefits that come from following Jesus? I hope that our response is the same as that of Simon Peter in verse 68 and 69. Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. Do we really know that Jesus is the Holy One of God? Do we really believe that Jesus is the bread of life? Do we believe that there's nothing that can satisfy us eternally other than Jesus? We need the grace of God to allow us to have faith. Even if Jesus gives the will to be able to follow him, God doesn't force faith upon us. We still need to choose to follow Jesus with the will that God has gifted us with. Let's bring this message to a close. Jesus is the bread of life. He's the one and only one that can give us the deep spiritual satisfaction that we all desire. And this satisfaction, unlike food and drink and other things and pleasures in life that will temporarily satisfy our needs, it is a satisfaction that is complete, perfect, and permanent. And to get this bread, there's one thing that we need to do, and that is to believe in the one whom God sent. It is to follow Jesus. We need to make an active decision to follow him every day. We need to follow him and avoid the mistake of following the benefits that come with Jesus. And of course, at the beginning, we might end up deciding to follow Jesus for the benefits that come. And that's perfectly okay as long as you realize your selfish motives and change your ways. Because remember, you have to be justified first, and then you go ahead and become sanctified. So the process of sanctification is realizing our shortcomings and then realizing that, hey, we cannot do this on our own. And, I've followed Jesus up till this point because of the benefits that came, because I needed to satisfy this thing. And the satisfaction comes as a result of following him, but we should not be following the satisfaction itself. That's just a matter of the fact that Jesus completely satisfies us, and it's realizing what selfish motives we have and then changing our motives. And of course, we have been discussing the past couple of weeks, as the response to this bread of life, we need to follow, the law and all the things that God commands us to do. But as I said, it comes after we have received this bread of life. So from today, let's put our priorities in the right places and pursue and follow the bread of life, who is eternal, rather than the things of this world that will be gone and spoiled over time.